Hey Lee, great to see you again, and it's been a few years, but I thought it'd be interesting to kind of talk a little bit about sales because for some crazy reason I took a sales role about 5 years ago with GE. Didn't know what I was getting into, and chose a really easy to penetrate region in Asia Pacific. But I was over in APAC and you were in the Americas, and luckily you had a lot more sales experience. And as I was kind of building up a sales team over there and kind of trying to figure out how to penetrate the region, I learned a lot from you with your sales process, and specifically kind of some of the things I was seeing with sellers just saying, putting into Salesforce, here's the close date, and then that close date would come and go, and it'd slip another 30 days and another 30 days, and just kind of trying to figure out how to get a little more consistency and predictability and accelerating that close process. You had a really interesting, kind of almost put a little bit of scientific process on top of the sales process that was really helpful, and I learned from a ton. Maybe you can just share a little bit about your sales philosophy and the process you've used.
No, and I appreciate that. It's nice to know that after 3 decades, I was able to contribute something back and bring some value. No, so yeah, being a career salesperson, right, and having worked at enterprise, at early stage startup, and private equity backed, it was really helpful because it gave you a different perspective of things. How you do things in enterprise and how you do it in startup and even private equity, you have to modify some of that, but a lot of the foundational things in process are things you can build on, right? And also things I built on were, I've been trained through 7 different sales methodologies, and they all vary, whether it's value selling, hold and selling, medic, snap selling. There's various ones, but really what you take out of them is, and what you use is what works. And it changes in different industries. So I kind of over time have brought that back together as to really it's getting down and qualifying, doing discovery with a client, not pitching them first, but really understanding, where can you align the value and align it to what they're doing. And it's really about Joe also doing this in a consistent way. So for the teams, they didn't really have that, was putting a process in place so they could consistently use that to discuss that. Over time, it becomes inherent to them and they just naturally do it. But if you didn't have that in place, you need to put some consistent structure so you get consistency out of it in doing this discovery. And the whole thing, it then bleeds into from understanding, aligning your value, which leads into proposal and qualification. You could extend that easily out to forecasting. And that's a very important part too. Again, looking across the different places I've worked, that's always an important thing. Are you doing what you said you're going to do? Are you delivering and in the time frame that you do for the company? Or like too many times that you see out there, December comes to close and half the funnel is gone because people thought they were going to close on December 31st because they didn't step back, follow a consistent process, and measure the things that matter to close there and that are real in a closing process for a customer. Yeah. So again, it's really just building that consistent foundation.
Yeah, no, I think one of the key things that helped our team was people were coming back from a meeting with a customer and saying like, oh, they loved the product. It was a great presentation, lots of nods, really excited. And, we'll close it in 30 days. And the kind of set of questions, the qualifications, well, can they articulate back to you what the value is? What problem is it going to solve for them? And who's the actual buyer? Do they have budget for this in this year? Who's the signature authority? Some of those kind of just really critical qualification steps that people, kind of forget to ask when it's a great meeting, seemed really enthusiastic, but that doesn't mean shit, when it comes time to getting them to sign a check and buy it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times in sales, people are optimistic. And it's good to be optimistic, but you got to be realistic, like you said. You pitch something, you did a great job. I thought I did a great job, and they smiled, and so it was a great meeting. But all you did was pitch them, right? You didn't really try to find out first, what are their challenges? What do they do today? Where could you help them? What's the value? And to your point, you go back with that optimism there and you put something out there, but you haven't done your job in qualifying to see if it aligns. People were just being nice. They took your meeting and you educate them or showed them something, right? Likewise, like you said, who does actually own it, or who are the multiple people that have influence and own it? Is there a budget is a great question, which it blows me away. That one question nobody ever asks. Do you even have a budget for it? And is that budget this year or next year? And it's not wrong if they give you an answer. That's part of discovery. And if it's next year, that's great. You could have the opportunity if you show enough value and fill their pain needs to
Yeah.
pull, or you work with them through that timeline and you continue to build that relationship and do that. So that's aligning realities with doing some of this qualification and going forward. And also that timeline piece of it is a big important piece that a lot of people just seem to miss.
Yeah. And not just do you have budget, but who owns that budget and like who decides that they're going to spend it on here and what am I competing with for that budget too? Like what are the other things that, you know, are going to be taken up with that budget that I got to get ahead of in line. And the other thing about those kind of qualification questions I thought too was you learn who's not going to buy a lot quicker too. So you're not spending a lot of time chasing rabbits down holes that are never going to materialize, and you can focus, kind of go and spend your energy on the customers that do actually want to buy the solution and have more value there.
Exactly.
Yeah,
In which case you're doing them a favor in your favor by balancing that and how you're spending their time and appreciating that.
yeah, yeah. One of the other things that I found that kind of process and some of those qualification and customer discovery pieces to be really helpful for is when after I left the sales role and kind of went into product leadership and P&L ownership was pricing because we'll not reminisce too much on some of those deal reviews that we had to go through and all of the focus on like, well, what is the margin really? And all this analysis and like, oh, we got to get this margin and turn it into a cost plus deal. But actually taking some of that and focus on like, well, what problems are they going to solve with it? If you got to find the value here, how do you price it in a way that they actually can, match that price that they're going to be paying to the value that they're going to be receiving back for it, and getting creative with some of the pricing strategies around it too.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to have margin as a guideline and goal, right? Because margin is going to drive your funding, your budget, your builds and development, so forth from a product. But it could be a double-edged sword. So I think you got to go out there and be able to sell a product and hopefully have value of that product that gets you to a profitable level with that customer and drives that, or incrementally across your customers gets you there. But sometimes just going in with here's my margin without doing the qualification can be dangerous because it could price you out and you don't get the deal. But I'll say flip side, if you do the right valuation and you're just, here's what we're selling because we need this margin, you may cut off a much higher value that you could have there based on your valuation, and you're limiting yourself. So while you can have it for guidance and leadership for guidance, your qualification process brings the value, but don't let that limit also what I'd say against the value of bringing a customer, what you could bring for the company.
Yeah. Yeah. And then also being able to actually structure the product and the service and decompose it in the ways that once you learn what the customers are valuing, how they're using it, instead of having to sell them this giant monolithic thing that they only need a small part of it, but you got to charge them for the entire package. Being able to break that down and kind of find the easier entry points that you can then cross sell and upsell, and find the right packaging with that as well.
Yeah. And I think that's one area that we actually did well too. I have been with companies where their heads down and this is what the market needs. This
Yeah.
is what customers want, or this is something really cool I'm working on. We're going to put it in here without really qualifying as what they need. And you do that when you're disconnected and don't have that connection with customers. I think one thing that our teams did in our geographic regions and even globally was we were very present with customers.
Yeah.
Relationships did matter in selling our industry. They do in enterprise sales. And being there in front of customers and engaging with them and even having them share with you directly couldn't have been replicated if we were just doing emails, Zoom calls, and blanket cold calls. Right. Allowed us to bring a lot of really good ideas back to the company.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the most beneficial meetings were when you bring a product manager, or even if you can bring the engineers themselves along and talk to the customer, like the eyes that got opened in those customer engagements from the engineering team, and like, oh, this is how they're using it. I never thought about this other use case. That's so easy to add on and just restructure this a little bit. And the ideas that came back from that were pretty awesome. Um, what earlier in the conversation, you were kind of talking about account planning and pipeline, getting to know the customers. You know, tell us a little bit about kind of your approach to account planning and why that's so important.
I mean, I think like I think foundational things go to doing the foundational things and doing them consistently, and account planning, the qualification process. When you really boil it down, it's very simple things, right? It's to go in there to do some planning, do some preparation, do some practice, and then play or execute. So I always call it the four P's,
Yeah.
right? Um, but really simply, it is all these things come together because you can't just go out there blindly and just go and present product. You may have some success, but I'm guaranteed you'll have a lot more success if you slow down before you speed up like that and you do some preparation, know the client you're going in for, do a little research. What are they saying? What have they said in the past? Where their challenges are? Where's the company want them to go? And how does that affect their department? What's their role in it? This stuff is out there. And you could also ask that to start a meeting to fill some of those gaps. And you'd be surprised that, don't be worried to say that, people will tell you if you ask, but you got to have some direction when you're asking and not just throwing out stuff that you could have found easily, because then you're wasting their time and not respectful. Really make it a tool that's your guidebook and playbook. And over time, it will evolve. It's not a one done, it's a living document thing that you could work from. This stuff all comes together, the account planning, the qualification process, which goes back into it and driving the value, where you want to go, your forecasting, your timeline of forecasting. I always tell salespeople, this is your business, and don't look at it to run from January to December or whatever your fiscal is, and then stop and go over. You could do that, but look at it like you're running a 36-month plan. This is your business. You want to be successful now, and you're planting seeds for the second year, third year. You're building on your intelligence and things so you could do that. So run it like it's your business, but you got to own it and do these things consistently. And doing the simple things consistently is sometimes a hard thing to do because you get distracted, other things come off and so forth.
Well, not just doing the simple things consistently, but also keeping it simple and not overcomplicating it and making it
Exactly.
something that no one else or even yourself can understand. I think the other thing I found with the account planning was, if you really know the customer and you know what their pain points and their problems are, you're delivering a lot of benefit to them. You're not just selling them a solution. You're not selling them a widget. You're actually like helping them solve real problems and becoming a partner and creating a lot of value and benefit to them. And that's going to open the door for continuing to have that relationship and to continuing solving things. And it's like you said, treat it as your business. It's not just a nickel and dime. You're not just, hitting a quota. You're actually doing some really cool and important things and building those relationships too.
Yeah. And if you go in there with that perspective and you are actually bringing value and bringing something back to them, you will be the one and the person, the partner, the seller
Yeah.
that they will take your meetings and come back with because they don't look at it as a waste of time. Unlike somebody that just comes in, throws a bunch of slides, jams, here's our product, how much you want. They may never get another meeting, or it may be a long time before they get another meeting. So
Yeah.
very different kind of relationship, partnership that you're forming.
Yeah, and then when they have new problems that don't have a good solution to them, you're the one that they're going to come to and say, "Hey, I've got this problem. I don't see any solutions out there for it. Can you help build this for me?" And you get that proprietary insight, that unique understanding of the customers that, your competitors aren't going to have because you're there for them, you're their partner, you know them, and they'll trust you to kind of come up with these new solutions, and that's a huge part of the flywheel too.
Yeah, and that's the evolution. That's when you go from being a seller to more the solution,
Yeah.
but you become an advisory to them. When you hit that role, then you know you're bringing value, and then that's a different level of successful career salesperson.
Yeah, yeah. And then you're not just gonna get, thrown out when someone else comes in with a 10% cheaper product. You're gonna be there for the long haul. Yeah.
Exactly.
I had a conversation with I had a couple of these conversations recently with some, startup founders who kind of got their first round of seed funding. Like, I as the founder who built this product and knew it was able to double our revenue in a year and really kind of grow this product and grow the revenue base. Now I've got some funding. I'm building a sales team, but why can't they do what I did? Why can't they kind of go and build, build that revenue pipeline? Why are they having such a hard time selling? What's your advice to them?
So I actually did a presentation in 2017 to an incubator startup, and this was after I went through the early stage startup. First salesperson, about 12 people there, very smart group. But what I noticed, and from being engaged and being out in the Bay Area with other startups, is the first thing I observed was you're bestseller and top seller, always when you come out, is the founders,
Yeah.
because they're the ones that have the passion. They came up with the idea, they aligned it and did that research, and they're the evangelist. And you're going to hit their network or their extended network or their investor network of whatever they have. And you'll go through that. But at some point in time, that network is expired, right? Or it's starting to slow down. You need to start accelerating and having some of these processes to scale. And not just the processes, the other thing you have to scale is that energy, that commitment, that excitement about it, because one or two founders can't scale beyond a certain point. And at some point, they have to keep innovating and do what they're doing. So you have to, at some point, bring into a sales team and get them up to that speed and then give them the tools to have them start going out there and doing that. That's a hard thing to do for a couple of reasons. One, it is a transition. So I think these founders should shadow and go out there, and a good salesperson will pick that up and run with that and take it from there. But it's also sometimes hard to let go, right? This is something you innovated and created,
Yeah.
but sometimes you got to let go to go bigger, right? So I see a dichotomy in doing both of those things.
Yeah, and those things that, as the founder, it's just ingrained in you. It's part of your connective tissue in your brain. It's easy for you to get out there and kind of connect the dots and the pain points to how you can solve them. If you document that and make it a repeatable process and kind of how do you ingrain that same level of knowledge in someone coming from a different industry? You can't. So you got to start to, create that qualification process and understand where your leads are coming from and all that. Yeah. Yeah. Um, what about, any advice you have on kind of overcoming objections and, when people are trying to throw you off your game and you know, well, your competitor does this so much better or you're so much more expensive. How do you deal with those kinds of situations?
Yeah, some people like to run from objections. I like to think that you want the objections. Objections, to me, I try to take a mindset is engagement, right? And something you have to overcome. So you have to continue your qualification process. If you really feel that you have value that you could bring there, right? It's your job to overcome the objectives. And what you don't want is to someone not say anything to you and just say, yeah, that was great. I'll get back to you, because they won't, right?
Yeah.
So you want to get in there, and through the qualification process, you want to understand, well, we're doing it this way. And, we got a team that does it. Well, great. Tell me about that. Are there any limitations that, just have a conversation, not sell them, and you want to undercover all these objectives, because otherwise you go to proposal stage. If you didn't do a good job handling all the objectives, or even asking when you're meeting with them along the way and you're building this, who else in your company will be coming? What kind of objectives do you think they will have? That's part of plan and prepare, right? So you could be ready for those. If you uncover all the objectives and handle most of those, by the time the proposal comes, your road's a lot easier.
You talked about pipeline and kind of stages and things like that. Um, you know, Obviously, if the only thing you're measuring is closed deals and revenue, that's like a lagging indicator, right? If you're not doing well at that, by the time you know it, it's too late. You can't fix it. So, what are some of the metrics and kind of leading indicators that you measure that kind of help correct things if they're getting off track or kind of get things moving faster before it's too late to fix that?
Yeah, so this is kind of where I've borrowed from many different methodologies and training and kind of came up with, um, you know, roughly about 12 questions. And when you extrapolate the industry, the solution, some of the things are things like the basics we're talking about, right? Solution, budget, ownership, timeline. How are you doing today? Criteria, competition. And when you go through that, I've broken them in stages and aligned that to a pipeline process. And the pipeline process is just so when people forecast, consistently, if here's what they're forecasting, this means they've gotten this far in the qualification process. And part of it's getting approvals, prove they have budget and so forth. But you kind of put gates at different levels there. So while you may ask some questions in a discovery, and there could be multiple discovery meetings, you may have filled out a bucket here, one here, and down here, but you haven't completed them. So it's kind of a guide, and this is why it's there, a guide to consistently, oh, I need to go back and do more research or ask about this area here to complete this, because if I don't know all this, I probably won't get there. An example would be I've seen people doing forecasts. I'm going to close this. Oh, really? Again, the easy one. Do they have a budget? I don't know. Do you know who the specific person is that would own this budget? I'm not sure, right? Do you know a timeline? I don't know that. Well, then how are you looking that it's going to close here if you haven't done that? You need to go back there. Have you evaluated what it could save them or what it could do? No, I didn't get that far either. Well, okay, that's all right. Go back, follow up. You're doing your due diligence. So you'll put the right proposal or something that they need in front of them instead of just throwing something over the wall to them, which isn't doing them a favor. Give them something that could be of value and helping them qualify it and helping them be part of that process. Now you're being valuable and you're starting to work towards that advisory role. So again, I've kind of gated it and
Yeah.
tied it together. So it's one, consistency and understanding where you're at and what you need to discover. But two, there's a way to tie it so then it goes into the forecasting. So people are looking at forecasting and it's not, what do you got, Joel? 50-50. Or I got 90. Well, really? In one meeting, you got to 90. You're committing this already for December 31st. Go imagine. I'm like, again, you just bring consistency across the whole process and you help with those steps in there, which
Yeah.
is a guide for someone to follow, but it really does take you along the line of bringing that consistency across the whole funnel process.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know when we implemented those 12 steps and started to ask those questions, it sped things up a ton because you're asking the questions that you need to ask and forcing the customer to start to think of some of those things too and get into the real heart of the matter, but also, adds a lot more predictability and knowing where you're at in the process and just being realistic about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And while you have those gates and those questions, they're not the end all be all, right? Over time, they will guide someone that's new to do that. But in time, it'll be comfortable and it becomes a conversation.
Yeah.
And in that way, you're going to get objections in between there. And those are conversations within each one of those that you want to embrace and come in there. So it's not an end all be all. Hey, otherwise, I could just say, hey, Joel, can you fill out these 12 questions for me? It's a guide to the conversation and discovery you want to do.
No, but it is a great way for new sellers with it or with a new product to know what to ask and how to get there and build that comfort so that it does become a lot more natural as they get more experience. Yeah.
Exactly.